We are Gold Ivy.
Our mission is to empower you to own and unleash your truth.
Stories of resiliency are gold, and ivy grows in hard places.
Those hard places are what create space for light to shine through.
You decide what works for your daily life and how to transform our lessons into your gold.
This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production. It's here. Our Move with Gold Ivy virtual workout platform is ready for you.
It's beautiful, it's easy to navigate, and it's absolutely packed with all kinds of workouts that will help you strengthen, trim, pump up, tone, energize, de-stress, all the things we want our body to feel. It's within Move.
Our dream has been to create accessible, affordable, and efficient workouts that you can do anytime and anywhere. But not only that, we have a weekly plan that you can follow so you don't have to think about it.
Everyone has been asking for a way to plan out their week and maximize their results, and we have the answer. Move with Gold Ivy. You can pick any workout you want at any time, but if you do want a plan that alternates muscle groups and leaves your body feeling energized and strong, we have the resources for you.
Speaking of resources, Move will also have a ton of them. We'll be adding all kinds of resources exclusive for Move members for your mental and physical health. We want you to get the most value out of our workout platform, and we will continually add kick-ass workouts, gut health information, physical challenges, and mental health resources that will leave you feeling ready to tackle life with energy and vitality like never before.
On top of the resources and virtual workouts, we will also be hosting live workouts.
So you're probably wondering about cost, and we're excited to share that for a limited time, only this month in January 2023, Move is free for a week and then only $10 a month.
And you can lock in this $10 a month founder rate right now to hold forever. We know the value of our workouts and resources are worth more, but wanted to honor and celebrate our biggest supporters in these first few months of launching Move.
So head on over to goldivyhealthco.com/move or find the link within the show notes of this episode and sign up today. This free week and monthly price, cheaper than any monthly membership you'll find, is going to end soon. So snag your spot and reap the benefits that you deserve to feel this year.
It's your time. Move for your health, move for your confidence, move for your mental clarity, move with Gold Ivy.
Dale, you opened your gym. Can you tell our listeners what it's called, where it's at, and how it's going?
Yes, it's called Farrell's Extreme Body Shaping, Maple Grove, Minnesota. We're officially open for business. The energy has been amazing. People are excited to be back on the mat, kind of like pre-COVID times.
Awesome. I can't wait to check it out, but I've never done kickboxing before. What can I expect?
Yeah, we offer intro classes, start with the basics, 100% beginner friendly, and my theory is start where you are, no matter what your experience level.
Awesome. So if I don't have any gloves or experience, I can fit in there?
Absolutely. We have gloves, everything you need. Just show up with your bad self and a good attitude. We offer strength training classes, kickboxing, yoga, advanced kickboxing classes when you're ready to up your game. Also, you're not in the area. We have members all over the globe benefiting from virtual classes. Whether you are using body weight, you have an entire collection of equipment, there's a workout for everybody. And we regularly offer our flagship 10-week transformation challenge, 5 to 6 days a week of classes, nutrition counseling, private Facebook group that provides you 24/7 accountability and support. We got you covered.
That sounds awesome. We'll link Farrell's Extreme Body Shaping in our show notes so our listeners can easily find you. And I'm just curious, Dale, what are you hoping they experience by joining your gym?
I'm hoping people can learn that there's an athlete in everyone, and you're capable of turning your health and life around no matter where you are. I'm leading by example. If I can beat stage 4 cancer in under a year, I can help you prove that you're physically and mentally capable of so much more than you think.
Love that. And last question, can you give our listeners a deal?
Heck yeah. Mention Ivy Unleashed or Gold Ivy Health Co. when you come in or you contact us, and we're going to get you set up with a free preview week. See you on the mat.
Welcome back. Season 3 is bringing the heat with guests that have absolutely blown us away with their brilliance, eloquence, and warmth. Today, we are honored to bring Josh Perry's story to light. As a professional BMX rider, Josh had to have a very specific mindset, support, and bravery to experience the heights of his career.
His story includes very high highs and extremely low lows that will leave you feeling grateful for your health, family, and friends, and inspire you to take even better care of yourself now.
Thank you, Josh, for sharing your vulnerable moments of your life with us and continuing to persevere through extreme hardship. We are elated to share your wisdom and insight with our listeners.
If you find value from Ivy Unleashed and are open to it, we would love for you to drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our hope is that as many people as possible hear Josh's unbelievable bravery and resilience. And it's more likely with gold stars and reviews. Thank you so much for your help. And now to Ivy Unleashed with the one and only Josh Perry.
Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. Today, Brooke and I are, well, I'm not sounding awesome, but we're feeling awesome. We have someone here that we feel really touched that we even get to tap into his story. I could cry even thinking about it. He's a badass. He's been through it and is lighting up the world with more information and inspiring people with his story. So first of all, welcome to Ivy Unleashed, Josh Perry.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me and get to share some time together today.
We are so amped.
Yes, we are.
And we're going to dive right into it. We know a lot about you from doing our research, but for our listeners who don't, and Josh, you started as a BMX rider. So take us back to how you got into BMX. What was your childhood like? Share it with us.
I got exposed to sports at a young age. I mean, my dad till this day plays all the sports that he possibly can, even though he's had 2 hip surgeries and all that. So yeah, I've always been really active and got into, baseball starting at Little League and I don't know, what was like 4 or 5, something like that. And then working my way up to Little League and playing basketball. My original dream, which is what Alan and I actually share in common, was I want to go to the NBA and want to go to UNC in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, because that's where MJ went. And that was my whole big plan as a 12-year-old. And then got introduced to skateboarding and rollerblading. I think that was like late 90s, going into early 2000s, just like most kids that age, it was just blowing up. Action sports in general with the X Games and all that good stuff. And then I saw bikes on ramps and I was like, oh, that's cool. I don't have to worry about little rocks, pebbles, stopping my skate or rollerblade wheels and flipping over and all that stuff. And then you could go out in the woods and make dirt jumps. And, it's just it was a means of transportation, that was more efficient and effective. And then a skateboard, rollerblades, and all that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, I just was dabbling in so many different physical activities at a young age. And then just one thing led to another, get exposed to this and that, and then tried it out and enjoyed it much more than skateboarding and rollerblading. So stopped doing those. And then coming into my freshman year of high school, I just really started to find my flow with BMX. And that was a time where some of my friends were kind of moving away from action sports altogether and either traditional school sports or just other things. And it was a combination of me finding that flow with BMX, but also not making the high school basketball team that year. And I was like, all right, well, let's just focus my other free time and energy on BMX, and started entering local competitions, then regional, then national, and then, led me to becoming a professional athlete in my junior year of high school.
I always think too, as like the parents, because I have little kids, of like, wow, what is that like it's cool to watch your kid win, but what is that commitment as a family to take you to these things and to watch you win and then decide, like, is this good for him? Is this toxic? Is he doing okay? Like, what was that like as a family to watch you? Obviously, you're not your parents, but what was it like for them to see this unfold and support you in it?
Yeah, so from talking to them now as an adult and, over the 2 decades since I pursued that path originally, I remember my mom was always like, she was the mom that was like at the skate park, just out there, like embarrassing me, just on her sun chair, just like tanning in her bathing suit outside the skate park when I'm there for hours on end. until I got my license. I could just go on my own. My dad, also always been super supportive. So I grew up, my parents divorced when I was about 1.5, 2 years old, but always been really supportive together and with me, always been in my life. My dad also taking me, lugging my bike around and then driving me all around. And then my mom, of course, all around the country, things like that. So they were very supportive in that manner. They both also wanted me to work hard, get an education. And I decided in high school to go to a trade school for high school. So I could, because I knew come my sophomore year, my 10th grade, that I'd be able to enter a co-op program. So I could go to work for 2 weeks, get credit and make money as a 15, 16-year-old, whatever it was at that time, but then go to academics for 2 weeks. And I could cycle back and forth. And I did that. I think you needed like a B- or higher to qualify. And so my parents were always like, we don't really care about your grades as long as your effort's there, because that'll directly correlate to your grades. But I knew like, I want to enter this co-op program because I don't want to go to school as much. I want to work. I enjoy landscaping. I still to this day love taking care of our yard. And I also wanted to make money because I wanted to, fuel my BMX passion and my traveling and, expenses like that for competition. So they were always really supportive. They just want to make sure I was doing all the things to be responsible. And when it came down to actually dropping out of high school, which long story short, in between my junior and senior year, I was on a trip for 30 days, or I missed the first 30 days of school because I was on a BMX trip in North Carolina. My mom got a letter in the mail saying I was expelled for missing 30 days in a row, but I could come back next year to finish up my senior year. And I was like, I'll consider that, but I'm going to stay here in North Carolina. And so I remember when I went home for the holidays, it would have been my senior year. She actually went in with me to sign me out, sign me out to drop out. And then I moved officially to North Carolina. I was living with my friend who was going to college at East Carolina University. Just lived with him in his apartment on his couch, started paying utility bills, contributing to that, and then eventually got my own place.
So you're like 17 at this point? 16?
My graduating year was going to be 2007. So I was 17. I turned 18 that November of 2007, which would have been my graduating year. Yeah, pretty crazy that they supported me on that level. But talking to them now, with going to school full time or 50% of the time, and then work 50% of the time, and pursuing BMX successfully, and from a young age, always hanging out with older kids that had licenses, and that those were some of my closest friends within BMX. I was demonstrating a lot of responsibility and work ethic and drive and this vision I was working towards. So talking to them now, I'm like, man, that's crazy that at 15 years old, you were allowing me to travel around the country with my friends. Some of the trips my parents would fly with me, but then some of them I was just with my older friends, just traveling. And at 17, you guys supported me in dropping out of school and moving from Massachusetts, like Northeast in America, down to the South to train with all the pros that lived out there. And I was like, I can't really fathom that, but I also don't have kids. But they told me that, you were demonstrating all these qualities and we could trust you. Ultimately, I wasn't partying. I wasn't getting into trouble. I was solely focused on this dream, this vision I had, that I was willing to do all these things and then sacrifice what my friends were doing that was fun, that I was like, well, that's going to create risk for this dream. And I had the belief that that was going to harm my ability. So I was like, I don't want to partake in that. So I found my niche group of friends that were on the same path. And yeah, they just were super supportive. But I also, like I said, demonstrated the abilities for them to trust me. And then I think I was 23, 24. My dad stopped telling me, or asking me what's your backup plan? What's plan B? He's like, I remember to this day, he just was like, you always seem to figure things out. It works out. And you keep, you've been supporting yourself financially and all these other ways since you were 17 years old, living away. And he stopped telling me have a backup plan, make sure, I'm proud of you, but make sure you got something in the works. And I remember that day and I was just like, man, there is that full trust. And here we are today. And I'm just turned 34 a couple of weeks ago, and BMX led me to where I am today. So if it wasn't for the support of my parents, I don't believe I would have got where I got in BMX, let alone where I am today. But I also, BMX saved my life literally and figuratively, which I imagine we'll talk about. But yeah, I can't thank them enough for that trust ultimately and in my vision, but also wanting to support me with what I felt creatively to do and passionate about, because I was demonstrating those other abilities, that they could trust me in supporting that journey, even though it was very unconventional. And a lot of people told me, don't do that. It's not going to work. Asking my mom, is she crazy? Things like that.
I was just going to say that I'm sure, looking back for you, it's a beautiful thing. And it's so funny. This is kind of a theme of what Brooke and I have been talking with other guests about, is this trust. You trust yourself and your abilities because your parents trusted in you. They believe that you're capable, and they believe that, you know, you're making these decisions and following through, and they could see that. But as a parent, I bet they had so much judgment on them. I'm like, what? You're letting him do what? You're letting him drop out? Like this backup plan and stuff. I'm sure a lot of people had thoughts about it, and how cool that they believed in you. And I think as a parent, you realize every kid is just unique, and you can't say you're going to parent a certain way until you know your kid and what they're capable of. And you were clearly capable of handling this. It's so cool that they trusted that and they trusted you.
And I've talked to my mom, and she was like, my dream for you is to fulfill your dream. And they both recognize, both my parents, that at 17 years old, I was living out my dream. I had this opportunity as a professional athlete that, you know, what is it, like 0.001% of people actually become a professional athlete in any sport. And so they were like, you know, we know that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but I was also demonstrating those abilities for them to trust me. But, you know, it's funny because at 16, 17 years old, you know, you still like 2/3 of your way, your prefrontal cortex developing to actually be able to think logically and rationally about life, let alone have the life experience. So I was just solely focused on like, here's my opportunity. Here's what I want to do. I'm doing it, you know, let me, you know, that my parents are going to let me move and like do all this, like, cool, let's do it. I didn't have the other distractions or distortions, you know, those limiting lenses of what was possible, because I was finding all these bits of evidence plus the trust and support of my parents that just allowed me to believe in myself. But I was also creating evidence externally to build that identity internally that it was possible, because I was already doing it. And I just kept taking all the things that I learned in school and work and how my parents raised me to work hard for what you want. And the only limitation you have on what's possible is, you know, the ones that you put on yourself. So, you know, that's why they, you know, going back to my grades, they didn't really care about my grades. Also, they both didn't do well in academics. So they're like, we don't care about that as long as, you know, you're putting your effort in there. And so when I got, you know, report cards or things like that, and, you know, my effort was slacking, they're like, what's going on? And that started to shift because, like I said, 10th grade is when my effort started to drop, but as my success in BMX went up. So I did the bare minimum to stay qualified for that co-op program so I could go to work, so I could make money to fund all this. But I also was just doing enough to pass to stay qualified for that, because I was just solely focused. Any other time I had beyond school was on BMX. So there was a lot of parts of that equation that came together that my parents ingrained in me, BMX ingrained in me, because it's not like, oh, I want to do this. Well, here you go. Just put in this amount of resources, whatever it is, you'll have it. Now you have to work through it. You have to work for it. It's mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally draining and torturous to get to that level I got to, and then to sustain it. So there was a lot of things that went into it. And just by demonstrating it, you know, I had the trust support of my parents, which, you know, like I said, if it wasn't for that, you know, I don't know where I'd be today. I'd probably be doing something that, like landscaping, that I enjoyed, but I'd always be wondering, like, what if? And that was the thing too. At 17 years old, I somehow had the ability to know, like, this isn't going to be an opportunity when I'm in my 30s or 40s or 50s, let alone, you know, anytime after that, because it's such a brutal and demanding sport. And here it is now, you know, let's go after it. And so, you know, I didn't want to live with the regrets of what if, you know, this opportunity I just let slip away, what could I have done if I, you know, acted on it? And, you know, I did, and I was successful with it, which led me to what I do today. And that same mentality is what I love sharing with people, and really the foundation of any of my work, or being on podcasts or speaking or my book, you know, that we're working on. It's just, you know, put that energy and that focus into it. And that way you can at least try. And if you fail, cool, you try. You don't have to worry about, you know, what if, and just live with that regret every day.
I think your work ethic at such a young age is so beautiful. And also the eye on the prize, like that focus that you now have for the work you do today. But I'm curious, back when you were younger, you had this vision, this goal, this dream. Like, what was that dream that you were chasing? Because in your early 20s, you were at, you know, the height of your career. And so take us back to that moment where, like, what were you working so hard towards when it comes to that professional career?
Yeah, so it's interesting because framing it one way or another, looking back at it now, you know, I didn't think about, like, I just need to work hard. That was, you know, what, like I said, my parents ingrained in me, and, like, you know, what I had to do to qualify for the co-op program in school, and then of course make it to the competition level I got to. But it was like more of like, I just fell in love and became obsessed with the process of riding my bike and progressing. So it started with, like, my someday goal was to become a professional BMX rider, you know, athlete. Like, I saw all the people that inspired me, like Dave Muir, Ryan Nyquist, and so on and so forth. but it wasn't like such a conscious, and again, I was 17 or I was 15, 16, 17. So it wasn't like such a conscious, like I need to put this amount of effort in so I can get to that. It was just like, here's what I want to do. And then subconsciously, I was just like, okay, what do I need to do? I need to compete, make videos so I can get exposure, gain sponsorships, do demos and shows, like whatever I can do to make a name for myself. And back then, like YouTube was just blowing up and things like that. So like 2006, 7, there was a lot of, BMX websites were doing these like video entry contests to get sponsorships. And that's really what gave my myself a name globally in the sport. But, the goal was just, I want to be like them, which it was just like, what are they doing? Well, I see them in magazines, so they're shooting photos. I see adverts, so they're working with brands and creating, marketing materials, and they're competing and they're filming video projects. And so that's what I focus on doing with my friends. It was just fun because that was just what we naturally enjoy doing. And it wasn't until I got to about 16 years old, my sophomore, junior year-ish, where even talking to friends now that I grew up with riding, they're like, it was just like that summer, something clicked where your progression just started skyrocketing beyond all of us. And I started to notice that some of my friends, when they got their licenses as well, like stopped riding as much or pushing it as much. And I was just like on another level. I was just at the skate park 10 hours a day. After work, I was there as many hours as I could after school. There was a summer where I lived at my grandmother's house that was like a half a mile down the road from the skate park because I was there so much. They offered me a job to just basically make sure kids wore helmets, make sure the ramps were safe. And they paid me like $8 an hour. And I just trained, and I was there from noon till 10 p.m. And then I go to my grandmother's, have dinner, go to sleep, and then do it again all summer. It was just falling in love with the process and enjoying it so much that, the conscious focus and intention wasn't so much there. It was just like, here's what I want to do. And I'm going to do all the things that I believe or think will make that happen. And then when I became professional and then I gained sponsorships and I was going to contests and winning contests and all these things, it was more of just like, all right, I'm doing it. Let's keep doing it. And then how do I get better? And then it was the first brain tumor diagnosis when I was 21 in 2010 that really changed my perspective on like, oh, wow, this can be taken away like very vividly and dramatically. And of course, my life was on the line literally. And so that kind of changed things where it became the catalyst, as I like to describe it, as like my like conscious awakening as a 21-year-old of like, how can I be better inside and out? Because here I had something internally destroying my potential or trying to destroy my potential and also my life. And I was like, I don't want this to happen again. And I also want to live. And I was more focused on my BMX dream being taken away. So that's when the shift started happening of like, all right, what do I need to do to get to the next level and maintain this and prevent this from happening again? So the nutrition and exercise and mindset, all that, started to evolve. And that's where the conscious, like, okay, like let's set goals. Let's be more focused and intentional with this process, but also still obsessed and in love with the process.
Yeah. Let's talk about that day. So what happened where you're living this out, you're professional, you're riding, and you get this diagnosis? Like what happened that day? How did this go down?
So it was 2 days prior to the diagnosis. I was training and I was getting ready. This was about March. And I was getting ready for the first contest of the season in April of 2010, which in 2009, it was my first pro contest win. And that same day, I won the best trick contest that won me a brand new Harley Davidson with a trick that I was the first to land in competition or in general. I think it was back in 2009. So I was getting ready for that same event that I was, coming in as defending, champion of that event. And I was like, all right, I got to step my game up. Of course, I need to, progress with my tricks and my flow, my height and my, landing and all that stuff. And so I had learned a trick, which is called a backflip tail whip. So it's a trick that you do straight over a jump. You go up and you do the trick and you land. So with a backflip, a tail whip is when you hang onto the handlebars, you take your feet off and you kick the back end around the handlebars, catch it, and then all while you're flipping. And so I learned that trick.
Sounds easy.
Yeah. So I learned that trick and I was like, all right, so you can do the similar tricks on a quarter pipe, which is just literally a quarter of a full circle. But what you do on a quarter pipe, so you land going straight again, is you rotate 180 degrees in the air. So you'll see that a lot of people go up the ramp and just turn and come back down to get speed for the jump. but the level of progression and competition got to the point where you need to do tricks on that quarter pipe. You couldn't just use it as a, momentum builder for the jump. Now it was like, you need to do tricks on the quarter pipe. So I had learned what's called a flare. It's a backflip with a 180, and then you can land, going forwards again. Otherwise, if you go up a straight quarter pipe and do a trick without rotating, you're going to land backwards, which is possible. But when you're trying to get speed for the next jump, that's not going to be, very conducive to your goals. So I wanted to do this backflip tail whip with a 180. So simply put, it's called a flare tail whip. A lot of technical language there, but essentially you're just doing a backflip tail whip and you're rotating 180 degrees in the air. So I was like, all right, this is like, at the time, not so many people were doing it. It was a really high scoring trick. And if I could do that on top of all the other things I did last year and on top of other jumping tricks I had, I was like, I have a shot at, winning this again. And so what we had back then was ramps into a foam pit. So gymnastics is where this became really popular. It's just a big wooden box of foam blocks. So you can practice tricks safely and you land in there. To a degree, with BMX and skateboarding and stuff like that, you have an object that you're trying to stay attached to. So if that falls in and then you land on it, of course, injuries are going to happen, unlike gymnastics where it's just your body. But we had that, that accessibility in these private warehouses that we had for training. And so I was practicing this backflip, tail whip 180 into the foam pit. And that day I had done 10 in a row. And I was like, oh, it finally clicked. And we didn't have the in-between ramp of the foam and the real ramp like we do now, which is called a resi ramp. It's essentially a ramp with foam blocks on it, and then a thin piece of plastic that's, roughed up so your tires don't slip. So it like gives, actually. It's like about this thick. And so it actually absorbs. So if you fall, which I've fallen from 15 feet in the air to my back, it still kind of hurts, but you get sprung up and it absorbs it. We didn't have that back then. So it was a foam pit and then the real ramp. And I was like, all right, we got it dialed in the foam pit. Now, next step is, I'm not going to try this for the first time at the contest because that's really risky. Let's get it dialed in on the ramp. The challenge was I was using a 7-foot ramp into the foam, and then the real ramp was a 6-foot ramp. So it may not make sense, but that foot of difference means you have to pop up and out harder. Otherwise, you'll land on the top of the ramp. And so I had that in my mind. And the first time I tried it, I was a little afraid for the first time on a real ramp. And I pulled out too much and I popped up too much. So it threw me, instead of coming back into the ramp like this, it threw me away from the ramp. And because of that, I over rotated the spin. And when I landed sideways like this instead of forward. So I got thrown off my bike to my shoulder and whiplashed and hit my head and got a concussion. I got knocked out for a little while and I came to, my friend was like, yo, you okay? Like, you just got knocked out. So that was 2 days prior or 3 days prior. The next day I went in for an MRI. So the actual moment of diagnosis, I was going in by myself. Again, I'm 21 now. I'm living away from my parents, 13 hours north of me. Didn't have any friends with me because I just thought going in for concussion protocol and just see what the MRI report shows. Hopefully there's no swelling, there's no bleeding internally, things like that. Worst case scenario, I was thinking to myself on the drive there, they tell me another week or two off the bike. It had already been 2 days. So I was already itching to ride. And I was like, it could be worse. And that's when it got worse. I was in there waiting for the doctor to come in. He came in, greeted me, and it was like, all right, you're here. We're going to go get your report, come back. And then we came in that second time, his demeanor had changed. And I was like, all right, what's going on? And he told me that the MRI had something abnormal. And I was like, oh man, like I know, like I'm weird. And like when I get really relaxed, I fall asleep. And even an MRI machine still to this day, 13 years later, I still fall asleep in them. And when I fall asleep a little bit, I like start twitching and stuff like that. And I was like, man, did I move? Because I know if you move, the image doesn't come out clear. And he's like, no, the image was very clear. There's just something in your brain that shouldn't be there. And I remember laughing out loud. I was like, what do you mean there's something in my brain that shouldn't be there? I have no way to open my brain and put stuff in there. And was laughing. He's like, no, like there's something on your brain. Like there's a mass. And at this moment, we're not sure if it's benign or cancerous. And when he said those two words, I remember everything just stopped. And I was like, oh shit, what do you mean? And it was like the first time I ever experienced like an out of body experience where it's like, I like floated up and I was just like watching myself. And I was like, man, like benign or cancerous. And he went on to say, we don't know if it's benign or cancerous, but we do know if you want a shot at living, you have to have surgery immediately. And also you'll probably never ride your bike again. And it's going to be very difficult to getting back to daily activities, potentially. And, after all that, I just checked out because all I heard was cancer, never going to ride your bike again. You may die. And it was just one of those moments. I was just like, just everything just was oblivious to me. And the nurses were trying to talk to me. And I remember seeing them, but it just wasn't registering. I just wasn't there. I was just so disassociated. And it was just like this flood of thoughts and emotions. And then when I finally came back to, I was like, man, like, what do you mean? Like, why is this happening to me? Like, am I that bad of a person? Like, what did I do wrong that like, this is what's going to happen? And, am I going to die? And that was that moment of being diagnosed. And it was just, I went in there thinking, 2 weeks off the bike, worst case scenario. And then I was like, man, like I'm going to die. And that's the first time I ever heard really in that like conscious moment of benign or cancerous, let alone brain tumor. And I was like, shit, like that's not what I wanted. And yeah, that was the moment. And again, it was weird because I was like by myself. And I also didn't expect it. I don't think anyone ever really expects it. I mean, there's those times where you expect something, but this was like, it just never dawned on me that I could potentially get diagnosed with a brain tumor. I thought I was just going in for a concussion protocol.
I always wonder in these scenarios where you hear this worst case scenario, like, what do you do? At some point, you leave the doctor's office and then you get in your car.
How do you make that phone call?
And who do you call? And what do you say? And who is the person for you that you turn to in that like help darkest day?
Yeah. So I ended up running out. They tried to stop me. I just was like, just freaking out. And I just went back into my car and I just sat there for a minute, just processing. And then I was like, I had to call my mom and tell her like, and I just remember she answered, she's like, hey, what's up, Josh? And then like, I just couldn't talk. It was like one of those dreams where like, no matter how hard or how much effort you put into like, just even yelling, nothing comes out. And I just was just sitting there and she like, I feel like she could sense it. And then she started to cry and she's like, what's wrong? And then like, I just, finally like stuttered out, trying to, hold back tears. And I just was like, I told her, what was going on. I forget exactly how I worded it. It was something like, I just got diagnosed with a brain tumor and I think I'm going to die. And that's all I really recall of the moment. And, writing the book and stuff like that, it's been hard conversations, but one of those next ones is going to be talking to my mom about that moment. And that was the person I tried to call first, was just my mom. I tried to just tell her, but I just couldn't get it out. And then after that, we talked for a little while, and then I called my best friend who was living with me at the time. He was at work, and I told him what was going on, and I was like, I don't know if I can drive right now. And so he left work and came and picked me up, and we just drove around talking. And that was really all I remember of that day, was just the call to my mom and the call to Brandon, and then him and I just driving around, just talking and just sorting things out. And the last piece I remember that car ride was just like asking him, was like, dude, like what do I do? Like, what do I do with my thing? I mean, I know they told me, next steps is, go to a neurology appointment, then, neurosurgeon, and then the surgery. But I was like, what do I do with my things? Cause like, I didn't have the mindset that like I was going to survive. I was just in that fear driven state that like, all I could think about was the possibility of dying. And I was like, what do I do with my bikes? Like, what do I do with like my money? Like, I'm 21, like I was like, I didn't know how to handle it. So I just remember us talking about that, and he just kept reassuring me. He's like, like you're going to be good. Like, like you're strong, and like, don't even worry about that shit. Like, we need to worry about you. And so that's really all I recall from that day, other than like how I felt.
From your story up to this point and where you're at, you mentioned the word fear. That's all I can think of. I'm like feeling it in my body of BMX biking. Like when I watch it, like I'm scared for you. Like anybody would say like, I'm too scared to try that. Like the first time you flip your bike, like how scary that must have been in this experience. And I know from following you that fear is something you talk a lot about. I'm sure every day you have to think about fear and probably have a pretty intimate relationship with fear. So could you just talk to us about the role fear has played in your life and lessons you've learned from experiencing that?
I think everyone has a relationship with fear, whether they acknowledge it consciously or not. I mean, that's just like, we're always assessing risk, and, as human beings, like our brain's wired to protect us from, threats of life, which gets complicated in the modern world because our ego is there to protect the body. And then we create all these stories around all these external threats that really aren't threats, like judgment and things like that. But the way I see fear is two things. It's like a signal of, internally, externally, what's off. We could label it as like what's off. There's various different labels of subcategories in there. So it's like a signal, but it's also information, which is, I guess, the same thing as a signal. So really what BMX taught me was, the simple act of like thinking about a backflip, for example, and you want to try the backflip, you're thinking about, the fear comes up because you've never done it. And, your brain's scanning for all the potential outcomes of like what could go wrong. Cause that's, our brain's designed to protect us. So, pleasure and outcomes aren't really what it's looking for. Cause that doesn't mean life-saving. It's enjoyable. It's what we see consciously, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be protected. It's not going to be a survival technique. So we obviously often go to worst case scenarios. And with learning a trick, we were like, oh man, I don't want to land on my head. What happens if I don't get the flip around or this or that? Or like maybe you don't have a foam pit. So back in the day, guys would hold carpets out with mattresses underneath it, and you try a trick like that until foam pits came around, or build jumps into water. So BMX allowed me to really understand emotional regulation to the best I could, unconsciously and slightly consciously, if that makes sense at that time. And it wasn't until I was like 25 where I got into like the conscious thinking brain, the subconscious, how all that works, the autonomic nervous system, and all those things, and really started making sense of the 25 years prior to that moment in my life. BMX really helped me with my relationship with fear, because to do any trick for the first time or anything in life for the first time, you have these thoughts that pop up. And then that creates this emotional experience that we feel in our body. And what I learned is, the mind is the brain in motion, and emotions are the language of the body. So we have our thoughts, which is language of the mind. And then we have our emotions, which are what we sense in our body. It's the language of the body. And so what really helped me understand this relationship with fear was an acronym called TEAR, TEAR. And it stands for thoughts, emotions, actions, results, or I like to say reality. So when it comes to like a new trick or a new job you want to get, or asking someone out on a date, or starting this goal or this project, whatever it is, any new thing, you have your thoughts. Depending on which way they go, you're going to get a whole different emotional experience, which then is going to influence how you act or behave in the world. And that's going to create the results or your external reality, and to a large degree, your internal reality. So BMX really helped me understand this foundation of assessing my relationship with fear and how it pertains to anything I want to do in the world. And, really going through that brain tumor diagnosis, it was about a week and a half before surgery, after the diagnosis, where I started to process everything. And I started to be reminded of certain people. So like Lance Armstrong, for example, another cyclist, very different objective on the bike, but went through brain, lung, and testicular cancer. And I thought, man, he went through 3 things. I'm going through one of those, and then I don't even know if it's cancerous or spreading. So that's way worse. He did it. So then therefore I can as well. So my thoughts started to shift. Then I started to feel better emotionally. I started having different emotional experiences of confidence. And I started to change my language about, rather than like, what if I don't wake up? I was thinking, what am I going to do differently when I wake up? Not if, when. And I just started focusing on that day that I'd wake up and how my life would be different. And that's why I said earlier, the catalyst to my being empowered consciously started in 2010 with that first brain tumor diagnosis. And then coming out of surgery, my actions started to shift because of my thoughts and my emotions, shifting of like, how can I better myself internally, externally, but also prevent this, and finally maintain this dream I've manifested and living beyond everything I ever fathomed at 13 years old when I set that goal. And so that whole understanding started to become more and more relevant on a conscious level. And I started applying myself more. I started reading more and learning more about these things, which led me from nutrition originally. And then in 2013, I blew up my knee, and that led me into the power of fitness, and then got into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work in 2015 or so. And then got into like the mind on all the levels. And I started just putting all these pieces together. And then that's what I've really understood is like, our mind is our most important asset, but we have to learn the operating manual. We all have a brain, and that's how I look at performance. Like, if you're a human being that's alive, you have a brain, that means you're a performer in whatever regard. It's not just athletes. And that's what I used to misunderstand about performance. And so when it comes to the relationship with fear, it's very simple. I try to make it as simple as I can for people. It can get very complex, of course, but it just starts with your thoughts. And if you can audit your thoughts, then you can see what thoughts are creating the emotional experiences you want or don't. And then it's as simple as shifting those thoughts. It's obviously not going to happen overnight, but if you can start focusing on the thoughts that you do want to entertain, the outcomes that you do want, then you're going to feel different. And that's going to maybe inspire you to do things differently or stop doing things that aren't congruent to the outcomes you want. And then over time, and the amount of conscious repetition and volume of effort you put into those actions that are congruent to your outcomes, your reality is going to start to shift. And that's really, it started with BMX unconsciously. And then that first brain tumor diagnosis really put the pieces together for me to start acting consciously on this relationship with fear. And then it was about 2016, I got this tattoo. It was the first tattoo. It says, fear is a thought. And then this side says, thoughts can be changed. And that was a conscious decision of mine to remind myself every day, I need to own my thoughts, because by owning my thoughts and becoming aware as possible as I can, then I'm gonna get a different emotional experience. I'm gonna do things differently or stop doing things that aren't serving me. And over time, my external reality is gonna shift, and it's just gonna mirror back to me what I believe about myself, which is a whole other conversation about belief systems and stuff like that. But yeah, if it wasn't for BMX, and if it wasn't for the first of many different brain tumor diagnoses and other injuries and TBIs, I don't think I would have been able to have the relationship I have with fear and accept it and embrace it. And as a living human being, it's not always comfortable or easy. And that's a big misnomer people have about me with my relationship with fear. Like, oh, you never experience fear. I was like, I experience fear every day. The difference is my relationship with fear. And to understand in that moment where I automatically feel afraid of something, I'm so programmed now over 12 years of reminding myself, and then having all my tattoos are reminders in their own way. But it's like, okay, here's what's going on. Now, how am I reacting to this? How do I want to respond to this? What do I need to do differently right now? Or what is this, back to my first bit about fear being a signal of information. What is this telling me? And I've learned the greater the resistance of something, the greater the reward. And it's why we're so resistant to things, because all the energy that's bound up in that process of exploring the resistance holds the outcome on the other side, but greater. And so, I know it's a long-winded way of saying that my relationship with fear has evolved, and it comes down to just being as aware of your thoughts and really auditing if those thoughts are serving you emotionally, physically, spiritually, energetically, or if you need to change them.
I love that.
So beautiful.
A lot of what you're saying resonates with me so much because of the work I've done as well, of creating that awareness and building that relationship with your mind when your body is fighting against you, whether it be a brain tumor. For me, it was my gut health, of learning our body is listening to every thought we have. And it's so empowering to be able to do something about it, right? You talk about Joe Dispenza's work and the work you've done. And for people listening, I think it's easy to think, okay, yes, we can control our mind, our thoughts are listening, and we have the choice. But you did the deep work to really learn how the neural pathways can be changed, how it works on a cellular level. So I'm curious how you got into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, how you started finding the books, to look at it as a way of, all right, Lance Armstrong did something about it. I love that perspective of who do I know has battled this and what can I learn from them and mimic what they're doing. So talk us through kind of what that process looked like. You get this diagnosis, you have these next steps of, yes, get surgery, but not of, all right, do the inner work and the healing. So what did that work look like for you?
Yeah. So I guess to give a timeline, so 2010, and then went through surgery. And then after that, a friend showed a documentary about nutrition and health, and how what we could put in our bodies literally makes up our body's materials over time. I think every cell in our body turns itself over and regenerates, and maybe up to 10 years. It's like the longest, parts of our body. But that really just simply put to me how important our food is beyond just food as fuel. Food is information. It's a hormonal experience. It's just so many different signals that tell different parts of our body to turn on and off, and getting into the world of epigenetics. And I was like, man, this is crazy. So for me, the first brain tumor inspired the nutritional changes and pursuing that path and reading books and looking for what I refer to as virtual mentors, as people I can learn from, consume their content, which in 2022 going to 2023, it's super easy for free on so many different platforms to consume. Anyone you want to learn about their mind to a degree, whatever they will share, and their work, you can learn. So that was that. And then 2012, I had a reoccurrence and went through gamma knife radiotherapy to basically zap the 2 tumors that grew back. And then for 4 years, they slowly shrunk and became stable. 2013, I blew out my knee, tore my ACL. I had a feeling I did that, and my athletic trainer at the time told me that's what They suspected it was, but I was just super stubborn and afraid of getting surgery because I knew that time off my bike would come from that. So I rode and competed on a torn ACL, meniscus, and all the other stuff for like 2 years until I re-injured it. That experience really opened me up to, okay, maybe I need to do something exercise wise outside of riding my bike 48 hours a day, 4 to 8 hours a day. And so that's where strength training came in. And I was very ignorant to the time, which I think a lot of people are, especially my experience talking to people. There's like, oh, I don't want to put on mass. I don't want to get bulky and all this stuff. And it's like, it's actually really hard to put on mass for a lot of people, especially as you get older. Like it's very intentional with food and like a lot of different things. But that experience of injuring myself taught me, that I needed to do something to strengthen myself to supplement my riding, which worked out really well. Now, it was the beginning, February 2017. I was in the middle of doing an ESPN article when I went in for a routine MRI follow-up. And I got, at the time, that was the 3rd brain tumor diagnosis. So the other 2 tumors I had on the left side of my brain that we used Gamma Knife on that were treated, were shrinking. They had been stabilized. They were fine. But they revealed 2 more on the other side of my brain. And when they said, hey, these keep coming back, we think it's a genetic disorder called neurofibromatosis, whatever it is. I just heard genetic. And I remembered reading Dr. Perlmutter's book in 2013 called Grain Brain, and him talking about epigenetics was the first time I ever heard about it. And the power of ketones epigenetically to control inflammation and all these other different things, mechanisms in the body that to a large degree influence disease and different disorders and things like that. And I was like, man, they're saying it's a genetic thing, they think. Why don't, and it's, at this point, we still are finding they're benign. They just keep popping up. And I was like, man, like, all right, well, I've been learning about this low carb ketogenic lifestyle and intermittent fasting for a while. And rather than, treatment of any kind, and of course, surgery, they were so small at that time, it just wasn't worth the risk. And I was like, well, let's go all in on a ketogenic diet and, learn how to adapt that to my athletic training or my athletic performance and training and things like that. And so I did that for about 2 years, and in 2019 got a follow-up MRI, and everything had been stable, no progression, no new growth or anything like that. And I was like, all right, cool. So this is working. So I started to modify it, expending a lot of energy and having a lot of high glycolytical workouts and training and things like that. I added in smart carbs, whole food based carbohydrates. So I wasn't technically on a ketogenic diet, but I was producing ketones in my body via blood strips and things like that. But that's a whole nuanced world to get into that I think people don't really understand the context that goes into a ketogenic diet and the metabolic process of ketosis. But I had also then started learning about exogenous ketones. So, I was doing intermittent fasting. I was being really intentional with my eating. I was taking these different supplements. I was, intentional with my workouts and, doing all these things and having a lot of success. And along the lines of 2015, so I'm backtracking a little bit, a friend of mine introduced me to Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. And at the same time, I was reading Jen Sincero's book, You Are a Badass, which is my first self-help book I've ever read at the age of 26.
It's a
great book to choose.
Yeah. And she calls it What the Big Snooze, the Unconscious Mind. And I haven't read that in so long. I'm surprised I remember that.
She has a good money one too. You're a badass at making money.
I haven't read that, but I've definitely seen her mention that. And so that was at the same time getting into that work of the mind and the subconscious mind, all that, how that works. Those 2 years building up to that 3rd diagnosis in 2017, and then implementing a ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting, all those things, those were all coming together. And so there's like the timeline. And it just was a combination of me seeking out more, like seeking out better ways to live and to treat rather than surgery, which is to me a last case, like a worst case scenario, last resort. I was getting to this world of holistic health and, empowering myself to avoid, I learned quickly on with being told you don't need an MRI, this, and that, here's some pain pills until I hit my head and got a concussion to get the MRI that discovered the first brain tumor. I learned through that I didn't have a pain pill deficiency. In fact, that's not a real thing. You don't just need pain pills to manage your symptoms. You actually got to get to the root cause. So then throughout that journey, I started getting into the mind and functional medicine and things like that. So it's just a combination of like me seeking the ways to be better and being stubborn in a positive way, which I've had to reframe over the years. It's really allowed me to thrive in these different manners and avoid being, identifying with my disability, as people like to label it, as I have. And so it's just a combination of that, and then friends, and then just submersing myself with this, nutrition mindset community with virtual mentors like Dr. Perlmutter. I've actually met him a few times, and I can reach out anytime I want to connect with him and other people like that. It's like I took my path in BMX and I just modeled that for my health. And then that was what became the foundation of how I built my business, of just modeling other people. And I look at them as models of success. It's, back to Lance Armstrong, I was 21, like, here's someone that did something that I want to do. Now I can do that. I did that with Dave Muir in BMX when I was a kid. And so today it's just like applying all these principles and looking at other people doing things that I want to do or have done something I want to do, and just modeling them inside out, their mindset, their actions, how they communicate, who they surround themselves with, what they do. And that's just, how I've evolved to just be and understand that, I have to have humility. I have to ask for help as well. And let's just see, what I can do, and really getting on purpose. I think that's the final thing I want to say is that third diagnosis in 2017 really opened my eyes to the feedback I was getting from people that didn't really care so much that I was riding, competing, or doing well or not. It was more about what I was representing to them, about falling down and getting up again, going after my dreams and all these adversities along the way, and what I was sharing and how people could apply it in their own lives. And that's what allowed me in 2017 to take a step away from BMX in terms of competition, to start my coaching business, to start speaking and writing. And then this January of 2023 will be 3 years since I've touched my bike, which is a whole nother story of why. But yeah, to your question, it was just these different aspects of like wanting to better myself internally and externally, and who I could learn that from. And just, I started to, attract those people into my life because of what I was putting out and my intention and my focus.
Oh, that's so powerful.
So powerful.
We talk about jealousy sometimes. Like, you could look at Dave Mira, or you could look at these people that you want to model and like, oh, I'll never have that. Or you can model them, like you said, and really empower yourself. But also something I keep thinking about in the midst of this is that, one, your brain has been affected and you've had to have surgery on it. And then you're figuring out how to make your brain better. So I'm thinking, like, how are you not so cloudy with what's going on inside your body? Because everything you're saying is such a crystal clear thought and process. And the healthiest people can think this clearly.
It's a full-time job, and then you're sick on top of it.
Right. And then, so that cloudiness of maybe what's happening inside of you, along with what you kind of mentioned, the people around you. I can't even imagine what your circle was thinking as you're going through the toughest time of your life, but you're like still getting after it and doing what you can, and not just taking what the doctors say, but you're analyzing it and
taking responsibility too, of I can learn more and empower myself and not just do what they say. I don't have to do surgery. There's another way to do this, more of the holistic side of things, of learning about nutrition and mindset. So I think what you're trying to get at is like, how do you come with that view when you're sick and taking care of yourself?
Exactly. And be such a critical thinker. Like, how did you have that strength and determination in the midst of the people around you and what was going on inside you physically?
Yeah. So today I can answer that consciously. 12 years ago, like I said, it was just focusing on what I wanted and then just being determined to do everything to make that possible. Now, upon reflection and making sense of who I am and how I came to be who I am and what influences in my life, like my parents and BMX and the BMX community, and even the adversities that people were like, that had to have been the worst thing ever. I was like, no, it actually was a gift. The way I summarize it now is another reminder tattoo on my hand. C is greater than E. Being at cause for your reality is greater than being at effect for your reality. So C greater than E equals empowerment to me. So what I've been making sense of my entire life is not all the time, of course, I'm a human, but the majority, that's all it takes, is 51% of the time at least, the majority of time, I've chosen unconsciously, now consciously, but at the time, 21 years old, even 16 years old, when I made the decision, 17, to leave school, I wanted to be at cause for my reality. I didn't want to, old Newtonian physics model of like cause and effect. I was going to cause the reality I wanted to experience. And if, rather than being at effect. So a simpler way of saying that is, life happens to me, No, life happens for me. It's a choice and perspective. It's not easy, but it takes the same amount of energy, same amount of time to choose that if you're equipped with the awareness. So now with 12 plus years of conscious repetition of reminding myself these things, I can live to the best of my ability. Again, not all the time, because I'm human, things happen, the world happens, life happens, but I choose to always get back to being at cause for my reality rather than being a victim to my reality of saying, it's that person's fault, it's this thing's fault, it's anything beyond myself. Because when you do that, you give away your power. I know that sounds woo-woo and people talk about it all the time, but it's brings me to my second point of what we focus on expands. So if we focus on, oh, Dave Mira is doing this, I'm never gonna be that good, that's what you're gonna get. Your unconscious mind is gonna build a belief system that you're not capable of doing that. It's not possible for you, it's possible for them, but not you. So what I learned is what we focus on expands. So rather than that, like, oh, they're doing something I want to do, it's not possible for me, I look at virtual mentors, whether it be Dave Muir, Kerwin Ray, Alan Stein, like whoever it is that I look up to, I look at them as forms of inspiration. Lance Armstrong, same thing, of what's possible, not what's impossible. But it's like, they can do it. They weren't born to do these things. They weren't born gifted these things. They had to learn, they had to go through things. So I look at them as like, okay, let's reverse engineer their path to success. What can I learn from this? What can I do? What can I integrate from all this in my own way? It's honestly how I developed my style that I was known for in BMX. I picked apart all the greatest riders I loved and enjoyed their styles, and I pulled what I liked and what naturally came to me that I could, harness and work on. I created my own style. So being at cause is greater than being at effect for a reality. That to me is the equation for empowerment. And then that leads into what we focus on expands. And that's how the unconscious mind is programmed. So like the word role model, it's literal. Like from a young age, what is like 0 to 7, we're in like a hypnotic brainwave state. So everything is just being modeled to us. We just absorb it. Our brain is developing. So we take in literal interpretations of what we see and feel. And that's how we build our identity moving forward, our personality, which creates our personal reality. So when you dissect all these things of who you are, it's not easy, it's simple, but it's uncomfortable. The resistance is going to build. But again, the greater the resistance, the greater the reward. If you really want to change anything about you or your life, internally, externally, you have to embrace fear. You have to embrace discomfort. You have to embrace pain on all the 4 levels of being human: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so, to your point earlier of like, it's got to be, so challenging with all you've been through with your brain. And like, I actually invested a lot of money, of course, in my last few years of like understanding my brain, the health, the state, all these different metrics. And I went through Amen clinics to work with Dr. Daniel Amen with SPECT imaging back in 2019. I asked him the same question of like, how, like, I keep hearing, like, even I remember meeting Dr. Don Biagostino at Metabolic Health Summit in 2019, beginning of 2019. And he was like, man, it's just amazing to see you functioning at this level with all you've been through. And I'm like, honestly, like, I appreciate that. It's also frustrating because I know, like, I'm very aware of reality and like what I've been through, but I also add a lot of pressure to myself for various different reasons, intrinsically with myself, and then, from my family and their expectations of me, which is to just be happy and healthy. But like, I build all these things up on top of, I deal with a lot of chronic fatigue. I deal with a lot of, I think everyone does, but like the negative emotions and, the mental, challenges there. And I've had a lot of loss in my life with my younger brother and, Dave Mira, both of them took their life, and it was really traumatic for me, of course. And like, I've always asked myself, like, why am I still here? Why am I able to go through these things that one could label suffering, but I'm still here performing to the best of my abilities? And so going back to 2019 with Dr. Amen and him explaining, he's like, man, I can kind of see where the brain tumors were resected and the different elements of damage it's done. But like, all the work you've done to this point, for that year, that time, it'd been 6 years since I read Grain Brain and started taking care of my metabolic health with what I was consuming, and then how I was, living my day, the community I was surrounding myself with, the content I was consuming. And he's like, if you hadn't been doing all those things, which I know to a large degree from what you told me you've been doing, is right on point with what I'd be telling you to do from this scan on. You're already doing those things. So the only thing you can do beyond this to optimize is take different supplements and do different things, therapy and things like that. But he's like, if that wasn't the case, your brain would look very different. And so to your point, I think I believe it comes down to all these different things of being at cause and being empowered to take care of my nutrition, my exercise, the people I hang out with, the content I consume, and just my sleep. And all these factors go into me being able to perform the way I am today, given all the things I've been through and still am challenged with. We haven't talked about this yet. August 2021, I had an awake brain surgery. That was a result of last May in 2021 having a seizure in the middle of the night and then revealing a golf ball size 5th brain tumor in my frontal lobe, which is what triggered the seizure. And then had to go through surgery, which I was awake for. Ironically, I was afraid to in 2010. This time I was excited because I was like, I've been messing with psychedelics and meditation, different like float pods, different levels of consciousness, and I was like, man, this is gonna be a crazy but cool experience that many people, even if they wanted to pay for it and could afford it, wouldn't be able to. And here I get to have this experience, but also I get to let people know how real this stuff is for me. I'm still going through this. That, and then, about 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks ago now, I got re-diagnosed, a year follow-up from surgery, revealed 2 more brain tumors had developed, but they're in the layer between your skull and your brain called the meninges layer, specifically the dura layer. So they're not like in the brain yet, which if you look at the first MRI in 2010, you can see how far into my brain it was and where it originated. It's crazy. So that's another part of my reality that I'm experiencing and having to navigate after the holidays of maybe potential gamma knife radiation again. I'm looking at psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for trauma related things, because getting into Dr. Gabramonte's work now, his newest book, The Myth of Normal, and hear him talk about neuroimmune endocrinology, and even stuff like my mom's told me when she was pregnant with me, she got pinned against the car seat in a car accident with my dad and had to get like broken out. And I know through Dr. Joe's work of like how epigenetically different stress hormones affect our DNA and wire us and this and that, and my addictions with stress in the past, and then being a poster child for trauma via all these textbooks I'm reading. I'm like, oh, they literally use action sports for children of childhood traumatic experiences and child abuse getting into these things. I'm like, oh, this is me. I'm reading a book about my life. So now moving forward, I'm assessing the ability to go through psychedelic psychotherapy for trauma specific related issues, because what I'm learning through neuroimmune endocrinology is low grade chronic autonomic nervous system inflammation creates these epigenetic factors long term. And I'm like, man, I've been doing everything I can with all the modalities, all the tools, available to me. And I have a graph I drew up that I'm going to post, but it's like, an X and a Y axis. The top is 2010 first brain tumor diagnosis. The bottom point at 0 is ignorant. And as they go in time, the severity of all the brain tumor diagnoses get lower and lower. And the conscious choice and empowerment that I've been, building has gone up. And I'm like, if I'm doing everything I can to the best of my ability, and I'm just locked out of accessing that part of my central nervous system where trauma is rooted, The Body Keeps Score is a brilliant textbook on this work. I was like, I think, what I've been learning about psychedelics and therapy and trauma work specifically, that's the missing piece for me. So, to your question earlier, it's just been one thing after another has been opening up a new world of information, new tools. And then the beauty of me that I've made the meaning out of this, why I'm alive, my brother isn't, why I'm alive, and Dave Muir isn't, is because I'm able to overcome these things, share these stories, and also explore different avenues of treatment that many people see as, negative, or the stigma around psychedelics, for example, or even therapy. But I'm willing to embrace those, explore those, and share, more importantly, and really document my life in various forms like we're doing right now. And so that's why I think I'm able to perform the way I am, given all that I've been through and all that I'm still going through. But more importantly, I think it comes back to my vision for my reality and my purpose for why I get out of bed and why I, have conversations like this, why I do the work I do, and literally why I live my life, where I've been down those dark holes of like, why be alive? Like my brother is not, Mir, took his life. And I feel like, I've been working through this, but feeling like a burden to my friends and family for all the things that is out of my control with the brain, but also the things I've done with injuries and, the choices I made as a younger adult. And I just like had this overwhelming feeling of like feeling like a burden to people. And I've been talking to my friends and family and they assure me I'm not. But all these things are factoring into like the purpose for my life and the call, like my calling in life of what I've made the meaning of is to help people, because I'm here, I'm able, and I'm capable of going down these routes that many people see as, frowned upon or, like restricted areas. And I'm like, I'll go down there because my intention is to heal and to share that so other people can, heal in their own ways. And I want everyone to be as healthy, happy, and fulfilled as possible, because to me, that's true success, is everyone getting to that level of satisfaction with their life in any aspect of their life. So I still have my challenges, of course, but I think what keeps me going and allows me to perform is my non-negotiables of things like having these conversations, being vulnerable with myself, and my nutrition, my exercise, my sleep, my community, my education, and my understanding with spirituality and reality. And I think that that's really the message I try to bring to any conversation I have with people. It goes back to what you focus on expands, and you can either be the creator of your life, or you can be the victim of your life. It's a choice. It's not gonna be easy, but it's simple.
So badass. Oh, I want to just give you a round of applause. God, it's incredible. I love that you just keep unlocking the next thing. There's so many beautiful
That's a good way to put it.
said.
Yeah, that's like my life, unlocking the next thing.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Join us on Thursday, January 12th for part 2 with Josh Perry. He'll be diving more into purpose, neuroscience, the stories we tell ourselves, and how important it is to audit them. And you'll hear even more about how Josh Perry relentlessly pursues healing in every way possible.